right, everyone, we are gonna get started quickly. Are people enjoying the music? That's my playlist. Oh, wow, this became very formal all of a sudden. Well, let's welcome our panelists to the stage, everyone. Round of applause. Wow, it's like a pageant. Oh, gosh. We're so early. Play the music. Keep it going. No, I'm kidding. All right. Did everyone enjoying this beautiful California weather? Yes. I am coming from Miami, Florida, which I believe is now the Bitcoin capital of the world. You guys know about this? Miami surge. Hands up. Who's been to Miami, Florida? I'm so sorry. So sorry. But yeah, so we're on to our next panel. The morning was, for those that were here this morning, I don't know, I think our brain is a little sludgy. There was a lot of information. Big up to Professor Nato Thompson for schooling us on NFTs. By the way, he actually does run a school, if you guys knew that, Alternative Art School. .net. Plug. Nato, you could Venmo me after that. Thank you. And then, of course, this amazing panelists. We had Glenn, Paul, Mika, Sarah, amazing artists. And again, kudos to the morning panelists. So, are we ready to go? Oh my God, we're so early. This is so not Miami. Oh, it's not LA either? You guys want me to sing?
Yes. Do it.
No.
Make it an NFT.
Anyone? We're gonna also do really like active Q&A because we love audience questions. Who has lots of questions that you guys want to ask these experts up here? Anybody want to ask a question now, just to kind of? Oh, wow! Right in the middle, sir.
Pizza Dow guy. No.
Ooh. He asked, "Is it possible to be an expert?" And everyone unanimously said no. So that's actually.
If you ever meet someone who says they're an expert, just kind of start playing like the little monkey with syllables in the back, symbols in the back of your head, like chunk, because they're probably just talking.
I see a hand all the way in the back. Question.
How long is this technology going around?
2 weeks.
Thank God it's almost over.
She asked, how long is this? Did you guys know there's now a Web 5? Yes.
What happened to Web 4?
I don't, does anyone here in the audience know what happened to Web 4? No, okay. No one does either. Yeah, Jack Dorsey, who, as you know, is former CEO and founder of Twitter, just announced last night that he is working on Web 5. And everyone's like, well, what happened to Web 4? Anyone? Well, we are going to be talking about Web 3, so hopefully by the end of our 90 minutes, we have some semblance of what Web 3 is. All right. Oh, wait, another hand.
Yeah, here's a really basic question. Thank you. A really basic question, okay? You're an artist. You've created a piece of art. You want to make it into an NFT. How do you do that? How does it become an NFT?
Great question. So there's a website called OpenSea.io.
Uh-oh, plug.
That you can use, and
Right
basically you can upload whatever it is, mint it into an NFT. So minting is essentially like making it an NFT. So like just mint equals make. So a picture is a picture, you mint it, and that picture now has an NFT, it's associated as an NFT.
But does OpenSea have the...
No, OpenSea doesn't own it.
But the mechanics for it becoming an NFT are on OpenSea.
No, it's on the blockchain. It's on the Ethereum blockchain. So it's a rabbit hole, but we can get into that at some point.
We're going to get into this. Clearly, the audience are dying to ask tons of questions. So let's kind of get this going. So we're now on time. We're 3 minutes late, so I guess we're on time.
Hey,
LA
Esther?
time, yes.
When we do get questions, we'd love to bring a microphone to the person because we're recording it, and then other people can hear the questions too.
We're just breaking the ice, but
No
thank you,
problem.
Claudia.
Okay.
That's Claudia Bester, everybody. Woo!
Thank you, Claudia.
We love you, Claudia. All right. Sorry, no, we're going to now go into our panel, but then please save your questions. I promise we're going to have a robust Q&A after we hear these amazing panelists speak. So, my name is Esther Park, and I am currently the Vice President of Program for Oolite Arts Miami. Please check us out, oolitearts.org. We are a arts nonprofit, artist residency, as well as an artist resource center based in Miami, Florida. So for those that do have come to Miami, those show of hands, come visit me. We are very friendly. We have tons of amazing artists. And some of our artists are actually learning how to make NFTs, so we're really excited. To my, I guess, stage right. This is Reihan Anwar, everyone, co-founder of Friends with Benefits, who recently graduated at USC. Weren't you going to wear your USC uniform?
I'm not wearing my USC merch out of respect for the hammer and this fine institution.
UCLA.
I can't even say fight on because Claudia has a can of tomatoes ready for me. So, yes, hi.
And then next to Reihan, we have Nina Del Rio. Hello, hello. Nina is the VP at Sotheby's for the Americas. Like, can we explain? You know, there's a conference on the Americas happening as we speak. Were you here for that?
No.
Okay. No, she's not. But Nina, of course, has been with Sotheby's for a very long time and has been working closely with their new NFT division. Am I right? Yes. All right. And next to Nina is Kelani Nichole. Say hello.
Hello, everyone. Thank you.
Kelani is, I think she might be an expert. Am I right?
I have some receipts, but I agree with the sentiment about experts.
So Kelani is the founder of Transfer Gallery, which is, I guess, based in New York and now kind of in the ether, which was a media gallery and also very early NFT kind of showcase space. Am I right?
We were engaging crypto really, really early on. Back in 2013, the gallery first sold art with Bitcoin.
That's very, in Bitcoin world, that's a long time ago. So Kelani is definitely a native in the field, and we're very excited to have her. So thank you, Kelani. And finally, we have Saya Iwasaki, everybody, who is head of People's Experience at OpenSea, which is this small little platform where you sell NFTs, and I think they're worth $14 billion. Am I right?
Probably nothing.
Probably nothing. Means nothing. But Saya also is pretty native in the NFT space, right?
I guess, yeah. It like depends on what we define as native. If we're not experts,
Yes.
then what are we?
But we're very excited. And Saya was part of the migration of the tech folks that moved and left the Bay Area. And
Feeling
moved to
real called
Miami.
out, Esther. Sorry.
Sorry. Anyways. So it's you.
Just kidding.
You. Anyways. So I wanted to kind of start this panel with these amazing fellows and ask the kind of where were you and how did you feel when you found out about this thing called Bitcoin and blockchain? Reihan, you want to start?
I actually have a lot of friends who are very nerdy and have very nerdy hobbies. And so I had a PGP, which is an early encryption protocol on my email when I was like 13 or 14. And you go from that early cryptography to cryptocurrency. It's a really small leap. So people are like, hey, there's internet money. I was like, okay, sure, I'll I'll spend $100 on the Bitcoin. And
Can you say the date of when that was? Oh, okay. NDA.
Needless to say, it was one of those things where, just like a lot of other folks, I entered the space due to the underlying tech, have worked kind of tech adjacent for a really long time, forgot about it because sometimes life gets in the way, school, family, all of that. And it's been really inspiring and interesting to kind of watch the rails shift from Bitcoin and Ethereum just being technical instruments to being instruments of arts and culture, where all the homies who are making digital art, uploading JPEGs, spending time on DeviantArt, Tumblr, all that, all of a sudden we're just like, yo, I can make money doing this? And I'm like, yeah, you can. And you know, I spent so much time in the arts and music world that something like this just makes a lot of sense. Anyways.
Nina, what about you? When did you hear about this funny thing called blockchain?
I'm sure it was much later than everybody else, and I have sort of a boring answer for that, but then an interesting answer for NFTs. I will just say to everyone, I'm not a technologist. I work for Sotheby's, and I work with large public entities like museums, and I'll get back to that. But when did I first hear about Bitcoin? We were at a management offsite at Harvard Business School, and our CEO started talking about it. And in fact, it was right around the time that we bought technology from Stanford, which became sort of high level. It's called Mira, imaging technology, creating NFTs, literally taking images of paintings and recording provenance and condition and authorship on the NFTs, which we can get to later, which if you're in the art world like I am, like these guys are all much younger and all have a technology background, but that's kind of game changing in the art world, being able to actually confirm authorship and provenance and issues that are really complex and complicated and disrupt transactions. So I'll give a little bit of background. I'm going to answer a question that you didn't ask, which is where was I when I first heard about NFTs? It was early on when we started selling them at Sotheby's, but in fact, I started talking about them because the American Association of Museum Directors got in touch with me and said, I quote, "The natives are restless. Can you and your CEO and somebody talk to us about NFTs?" And I gathered our chief counsel and our chief executive, and we got on the Zoom call. I think it was 2021, with about 60 or 65 museum directors, which started a conversation, which is why I'm here talking to you now about how can museums interact in this space? How can they create revenue streams from works in their collection, which is without essentially deaccessioning those works, divesting anything from the collection. So it's gone into really interesting places, which we can talk about later.
The natives are restless. Who were the natives?
The museum directors.
Oh.
Like, they want to know about NFTs. Can you please tell us what's going on in the market? I think the Beeple sale had recently taken place at $70 million, and we had sold a fantastic POC, really a sort of collaborative creative project edition for, I can't remember, I think it was like just shy of 19 million. So people were sort of asking the question, what do we do with this?
Wow. I also want to talk about this DAO that tried to buy the Constitution, and I know you were part of that sale, but let's hold off for that later. Kelani, what about you? Blockchain.
Yeah, so I heard about Satoshi and read the white paper shortly after it came out, and I was fascinated by the mythology of this thing and the ways that it might impact culture. And then in 2013 is when I first got my hands into Bitcoin in a way. I was working with this artist called Le Turbo Avidon, who is an avatar and only exists online. And she bought a space in Second Life and built Transfer Gallery to the floor plan, my Brooklyn-based space, and installed her show there. And my role was to translate that into the physical space of the gallery. So for this hybrid practice, a virtual artist, it made sense to offer work for sale in this speculative virtual currency. So I'm a technologist, and I'm not afraid to get into the details. And so I got a wallet, and I set up a Mt. Gox account, and we had a Mt. Gox button on our website. So you could transact and buy the works that way. So that was my first foray. And then I also work in tech. I've been doing that for 15 years. So very early on as blockchain, I guess you could call them companies, for lack of a better word, startups started to form. I was working on the tech side, for example, with Protocol Labs very early as a consultant. So also really understanding what it means to build for these technologies.
Amazing. Did you say Mount Gox?
Mount Gox. Gox.
Anyone know what that is? Oh, okay.
Actually, La Turbo has a monument to Mount Gox. It's one of their works, so you can check that out online.
And y'all should Google Mount Gox too if you want to go down crypto history lane.
Yeah. All right, guys. The Hammer Wi-Fi is very fast, so you guys can quickly Google it. Saya, what about you?
Love helped me discover blockchain. So my now husband, Matt, back then, this was around 2014, he had been in crypto in a while, just like following, and then he started working with this company called Definity. And, we had just started dating like a year ago. And so around 2015, I wanted to understand more of his world. And he was really, 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 really bad at explaining what it was. And my background's in education. So I used to run a school in Myanmar, and I used to teach art. And the more I learned about crypto on my own, the more my worldview changed because I went to school in New York for my undergrad, but I did grow up in Myanmar. I also spent part of my childhood in Congo. And these are, back then they were called developing countries, but now emerging economies. And it is really hard to move money outside of countries. It is really hard to migrate money cross borders. And so when I had real life struggles, like in undergrad, being like, oh no, will my parents be able to send any money for me to go to school? They had to literally fly out of Myanmar with cash, go to Thailand, that's a 1-hour flight, and then from Thailand, they had to fly to Japan, because my family's Japanese, that's a 6-hour flight, and flights weren't cheap, and so then they would go, and then they would have to process it in their bank account, so the whole process would take we need at least 3 months to plan payments. So with that in mind, when I started learning about crypto, I was like, holy shit, so you mean that there's a system in which you can transfer value and currency across borders in 1 day, or depending on the length of time. So because of that, I thought it was really groundbreaking, and I just wanted more people to access it. So I started. I also did graphic design. When you're a teacher, you don't get paid a lot. When you run a school, you don't really get paid a lot. So my side hustle was graphic design, and I started drawing out how the blockchain works and what is crypto, starting hosting some salons to get more underrepresented people in the space, and that eventually landed me a job at a company called Bitsky. Back then it wasn't called Bitsky. I was just saying this at lunch. I just needed a job at that time, so I went on Angel List and crying submitted one application to a social media company who replied a week later saying, hey, we're doing a blockchain thing. I see you've written articles. So I joined the company, and our whole idea was around gaming. And that's when I started hearing more about these NFT companies. And this was around 2018. So it just led me down the rabbit hole. And yeah, I've been in the hole since.
And here we are.
But it was love.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it was love that made you want to learn about blockchain. That's great.
Love in the time of crypto.
So, this panel really, is about the ways and how new technology is shifting power in culture. And for all of us here, I think we all kind of got this aha moment when this giant $69 million sale of a guy named Beeple, who, let's be honest, I did not know anything about Beeple prior. And then you read all the headlines. He was the 3rd largest sale of a living artist, second to Jeff Koons and David Hockney. Talk about a game changer moment for the art world. And I think a lot of art folks, those that have been in the trenches for so long, we were WTF, right? We're okay, our entire reality has now been dissipated. Who is this Beeple? What is an NFT? What is happening here? And it also just kind of mutated into the idea of gatekeeping. also the fact that this was on a platform that is Christie's is what, a 400-year-old auction house?
270 years.
Okay, yes. So it's like all of the different worlds have melded into one. You have kind of the old world guard of the Christie's auction house selling a brand new technology called NFT by kind of an unknown artist named Beeple that essentially a guy like Jeff Koons is a little bit more in value. Okay, now, panelists, what the F?
Yeah,
Can we explain how does this whole thing happen?
I mean, the art world is the first industry after finance that has been disrupted by Web3. And if you look back at the history of the internet and technology at large, the art world has largely remained unchanged. Web 1, no big deal. That bubble burst. Web 2 came up. Oh my God, e-commerce. Maybe we'll be able to sell art online. Oh my God, Web 2.0, social platforms, Instagram, maybe artists can connect directly with collectors. But largely, the art world has always sort of made a spectacle of technology. It goes through these sort of hype cycles. Like in running a tech-focused gallery, I really felt this. I was always the one who was called when it was like, oh, VR. Oh, now it's AR. Now it's AI, right? Like these sort of, and now it's immersive installations, these sort of hype cycles. But in this moment, in this shift from Web 2 to Web 3, the art world is really the first industry to be completely upended. And it's because art became a perfect use case for crypto. And I like to say, contemporary art has become crypto's bitch.
Quote. Nina?
I just wanted to say, well said, but also just from this kind of market perspective, because I, as someone who's been really in the art market for years and years, we all took notice because of the price, of course. I think when you were looking behind the scenes, and this would have to be, if the Christie sale took place in March, our first sale took place in April of that year. Everyone was paying attention because they were also saying, where is this wealth, where is this money, where is this sort of run up in bidding and prices coming from? So if you kind of peel it back a little bit, certainly, and we were talking about this at lunch, the auction houses were used a little bit to put NFTs and new technology on stage. And what we saw when we looked at the data, and I promise this isn't boring, is there was just a huge influx of new participation, where we might have 2-3 bidders normally on a work, and at that level it might be 1 or 2. There were on average 11 bidders in the 7- and 8-figure NFT works, and 78% of whom were new to Sotheby's.
I was going to say,
this was craziness for us, and everyone thought, oh my God, this is the new direction and secret sauce. I think there's a little bit of Swiss cheese, and there's lots of holes in that formula. And I think what we saw also is the bidders, by and large, sometimes were also associated, possibly invested in cryptocurrencies, and there was a little bit of a connection there. So I love hearing your view because it's so much more...
A little bit of a connection.
It's so much more informed. I think from the market perspective, it really made people take notice, but then also look at, someone said, where's this going? How long is this technology going to last? And I think from my perspective, looking at the market, it's really the technology that is going to disrupt how we conduct the art market in general, and I don't say that lightly, NFTs or not, the sale of art, and what can artists do? How can nonprofits sort of participate in resale? What does the secondary market look like? How can all of the creators and really the sellers participate in markets going forward? That's going to change hugely. So I like your explanation better, but just from a market perspective, it was really an aha moment.
Reihan, I know you have some insight on this. You mentioned that kind of blew my mind about this was more of a statement on Ethereum than it was an actual collector that really genuinely believed in the artist.
Controversial opinion alert. I've always kind of viewed the story of Ethereum in particular as a tech story on one side, an art story on another. And the thing is, it's almost like the Ethereum versus Bitcoin story is almost closer to Mac versus Windows. And I'm sure all of y'all are Android versus iPhone. Where are my iPhone users at? Where are my Android users at? Android users, how often do you get made fun of? but that's kind of what's happening here with Ethereum and crypto in particular, where a bunch of folks who are developing for one particular blockchain or operating system were like, we're all building this together, so the value of what we're building is going up. So people who got in early when Ethereum was cheap were now reaping the benefits of everyone building on this together. And that initial cost of that Ethereum that bought the Beeple pieces was probably hovering around $1 in ETH. But by the time that sale completed, I think that was floating around, what, 2,500, 3K? And so there are some folks who look at that sale not as a $3,000 in ETH sale, but as like a $1.25 in ETH sale, the price at which it was bought. So a lot of it is building the legitimacy of a development ecosystem, not so much an art ecosystem, which is another way of kind of looking at this. And also, I mean, to bring it back to art full circle, is I always tell artists that as you're choosing which chains to build on or how to best preserve your work on chain, think about who's doing the work behind the scenes, because your developers are kind of your new curators in a very slight way.
And one of the things that really intrigued me was that they used Christie's to do this sale. And part of that was this also a big like FU to the institution that you're having this random NFT artist on this pretty well-established and respected platform? Do you think the sale and the hype would have been the same if it was on a OpenSea or a Foundation or any of the more kind of native NFT platform?
Well, I don't know if I can answer that definitively, but you know, the thing is, like, sales before Christie's, sales were still happening. Like, people were still trading, so it's very possible. I don't know the backstory. I'd be curious to hear your perspective, Nina, but it's very possible that Christie's could also have been like, is this an opportunity to look at all of the activity that is happening in, you know, like the NFT art space and be part of that, right? And like, so this is my perspective coming from like having to sell a lot of the vision of NFTs and the idea to a lot of hardcore Ethereum and Bitcoin developers in 2018. And the space was so tiny. It was like 50 people at a conference, and it's always the same people, like maybe in New York or in Hong Kong or whatever, but it's always the same people. So we're like having really great conversations around NFTs. But you know, like I had to sell this idea, like I had to sell developer tools and wallets. And so I had to go to like, you know, Ethereum developers and say, look, like NFTs, they're really incredible because they allow ownership, right? This whole idea of property on, you know, in the digital space. And I got shot down so many times, and there are so many people of that like small NFT track. We commiserated a lot on like everyone shitting on NFTs all the time. And so like coming from that, you know, the very idea that NFTs can have a platform, like this idea of that technology, you know, being on the Christie stage, I wouldn't see that actually as much of a FU, but more so of a, oh, we got this far to get on that stage when so many people, even within the crypto community, didn't believe like NFTs would go anywhere. And so that's kind of like my take on it. But, you know, I don't know what the like auction world's perspective on it would be.
I mean, I can't speak for Christie's. I can speak for that sense when this was going on. And again, it was, I think, March of 2021, if I'm getting my dates right, where everyone, including the auction houses, were saying, oh my gosh, if we don't take advantage of this, we're going to be left behind. And there was a sense of the auction houses, they're big stages. So I think that was very smart that Christie's conducted the Beeple sale. It was smart on behalf of the creator. It was smart on behalf of the crypto investors who largely, to Reihan's point, largely supported that sale. But I remember also feeling like, okay, we sell fine and decorative art. While we are not curators, we are a filter of what's considered collectible and what isn't. And we need to be really careful. Yes, we need to jump on this and take advantage of the opportunity, but we really need to be careful. And so we started working with artists themselves, which I think it could have gone in many different directions. The project with POC was a very deliberate place to start. So it was like our editorial that we really felt this artist had value and should be tradable. But I think that theme of, a little bit of qualitative analysis, and I'm not saying we are the arbiters of what is good art and isn't, but we have to take that position to a certain extent. And I think this theme has continued with a lot of the other organizations who are thinking about getting involved, again, including museums who almost take the position. They often partner with artists on their NFT projects, but take this position of becoming a creator. And I think that is really interesting. But I would go back to the point of I think there was a sense of oh my gosh, if we don't do this now, we're going to be left behind.
And Kelani, I mean, you've been, again, early on, working in technology and the arts. For you, how has it been, when it comes to kind of monetizing this burst? I was going to say bubble, but burst. And do you feel like it's genuine?
So Transfer in particular took a really critical stance when NFTs were emergent. As a gallery who has been authenticating and selling digital art for almost a decade now, we really saw an NFT as another form of receipt. It's a contract. It's another form of authentication. We have much more sophisticated forms of authentication and verification, conservation, for example, preparation for acquisition. There are well-evolved practices for stewardship of ephemeral media art. So as NFTs emerge, from my position, they're quite stupid, the protocol. It's just not actually very robust. It points to one file. A digital artwork is always much more complex than one rendered file. We launched a show called Pieces of Me. It's still online, piecesofme.online. And we wanted to do something that wasn't about money in a space where everything else was. And the way that Pieces of Me is structured is sort of as a solidarity experiment. So again, from my position, I was seeing these non-custodial platforms coming up, right? The super rares, the foundations, and they were actually coming up on the backs of artists, right? It was up to the artists to front the minting fee so that these platforms could rise, right? And so it was very important to me at Transfer that we were covering all those costs, and we were also doing things ahead, like doing the preventative conservation and care, the sort of custodial care for these NFTs, providing robust owners' rights and obligations, for example, exhibition instructions, trying to add that depth back into the protocol. And then the way the exhibition is structured is that 70% of the sales would go to an individual artist and 30% would be redistributed to everyone in the exhibition. And so this is the solidarity experiment, right? What would it mean to redistribute wealth? The other thing I did was sort of reject auctions. I think that art has a value as an agent who has been building value for a decade. I really believe that. And so we set a value. We set that value in ETH, but knowing that that price changes every day. We tried to make an alternative proposition about value in this ecosystem. All sorts of other specifics. You can check it out, piecesofme.online. But long story short, it was a proposition that largely failed because we were not participating in the mechanics. When I say failed, it failed from a financialization perspective, right? Which it always took the position to be something more than about money. At this point, about a third of the works have sold. What we did really, really well is that we created this proposition in between NFT. It was sort of optional to have an NFT. So it allowed a lot of museum curators to come in and look at these works and think about acquiring works off-chain, because very few museums still have the capabilities to do on-chain acquisitions. So what has been really awesome is that now there are 3 institutions who are working on acquisitions from this show. So while it was an immediate failure from a market perspective, it has become a great sort of success success and has been widely written about. A lot of the art and ideas have been centered in a lot of great critical writing. So in all those ways, it was a really fun experiment. But yeah, it's just to say, like, I never aped in. It's not my relationship to it. I'm here to build a relationship of longevity and depth with any technology. And that's why I'm so much more excited about things like Friends with Benefits, but the potentials for arts organizations to think about governance and how this Web3 world runs and is structured.
Yeah, speaking of Friends with Benefits, Reihan, do you want to talk a little bit about your DAO and how that all came about, and what kind of is the mission?
Sorry, I'm like bracing myself to talk about myself. Oh, vibes.
The mission is vibes.
Mission of vibes.
I went on a really long rant about vibes the other day. I'm actually going to start with that because you brought
do it.
All right. So that's part of the story for FWB. I've been in arts, music, culture, some above ground, some below ground, all sorts of stuff for almost my whole life. I've been everywhere from, the crusty all ages punk venue in everyone's hometown, playing drums, to running a record label, to booking shows and hitting every festival in the world, working with amazing artists like Shepard Fairey across the board. And so when FWB hit, we really started because of the pandemic. I'm sure those of you who were in the morning session were like, yo, the world stopped and the internet switched on. And for us, coming from really the arts and culture space professionally, we watched so many of our musicians, visual artists, poets, etc., suddenly get hit with the fact that, like, yo, I'm not making any active money from touring, being on stage, etc., and I'm also not making any passive money because no one's at work listening to Spotify, which I was like such a huge light bulb from a music geek standpoint. I was like, oh, y'all actually were like maybe not paying rent off Spotify, but that maybe covered groceries. And a lot of these artists, as a result of this downturn, were burnt out on Twitter, burnt out on social media. They were like, to speak very frankly, it feels like I have brain worms and this sucks. So me, Trevor McFedries, who's our main founder at Friends with Benefits, and a few others, really were like, how do we build a robust online community for folks to really come, commiserate, chat, and kind of just shoot the shit? And out of this kind of convivial experiment, folks were really tapping on my knowledge and my time. So I was cutting class at Marshall, reading like the Ethereum yellow and white papers. I was reading about ERC 721s, like all the foundational elements of NFTs, and all of a sudden explaining it to all my artist friends, folks whose day jobs were like at Nike or at the Chicago Bulls, or designing stuff that you might be wearing right now, and saying, hey, you do this, here's how we can put it in a digital framework in a way that makes you money and kind of builds your own notoriety. And what started happening is members within FWB were chatting with each other about, like, how can we best build? How can we best work together and collaborate? And we saw the rise of so many cool experiments and pieces of art in the digital space. But the thing that like hits me in the chest every time is when someone, not on Discord, not on Twitter, texts me and is like, yo, Reihan, because of NFTs, I could turn down like a client gig. And I don't have to deal with, large mega corporation XYZ because I made a couple ETH off, super rare. Or, hey, Reihan, I taught myself how to use my own smart contracts. And folks who were good at Photoshop are all of a sudden developers in their own right. Like, that's so sick. So over time, the way I see Friends with Benefits is kind of this is in the New York Times, so I can't put this back in the bottle, but the anti-crypto club. I don't talk about crypto as much. I don't talk about, Ethereum and being on chain and shit like that. I really talk about, yo, what are you doing today that was impossible 2 or 3 years ago from your time, your energy, your expertise, and the technology underneath it? And how can I best connect you to technologists who can help you realize your vision, whether it's, I want to make 10,000 dynamic art pieces in the shape of butterflies, or I want to, in the case of my buddy Chuck Anderson, No Pattern, I want to take a hacked version of Adobe Illustrator that has been broken for 6 years and use all the glitches to make a coffee table book. and I want to sell each of those pieces as an NFT on chain, and I want to collaborate with other artists on chain. Like, he built a whole world around this stuff, and this was a dude who, like, his day job was working with the Bulls. Like,
That's actually a pretty cool day job.
it's a cool day job, but you know, he was someone who was like, it's a job, dude. It's a capital J job, and all of a sudden, I'm back into being creative, and I can set my own rules. So that's kind of been the story of FWB over the last 2 years.
Saya?
Well, I was gonna. I think that you're spot on. You know, the conversation around crypto and NFTs, the way, like, why I fell in love with it, because it's a future of work conversation. Mm-hmm. It's about how we evolve, how we like show up, and you know, there's this like example that we would use in the past of one day. So Sims, like, who knows Sims, the game? Yeah. So I met somebody who was working on, you know, asset design for Sims, like when it first started, and she basically dropped this stat, which is like 70% of Sims items, the furniture, the, you know, doors, all of that, it was created by the users. It was created by the community. That's like 70% of user-generated content, 0% went to any of them. And so it's really shifting the conversation around maybe one day someone's really good at making hoodies, digital hoodies, and they can add their, like, you know, creativity to it, and they can sell it. They can, you know, sell it in a digital marketplace, or it's tied to some tangible physical item, who knows? But it allows like this economic empowerment and freedom that wasn't as accessible before, only accessible really through larger institutions. And that shift to the individual regaining like ownership and, you know, more power to that, like, that is a really powerful thing that, you know, we're not even close to, in my opinion, you know, more than 2% or 3% of like where we could be. There's just so much more. But what you said really like resonates with me, because it's a future of work conversations. Like, how do we decide how we spend our time, our skills, our capabilities, our ideas, our resources on the things that excite us, and we can find communities who value that versus like marketplaces or, you know, somebody else defining that for us.
Can I add on to that?
Go ahead.
All right. So we've been talking about Beeple a lot, and he's someone who, if you're local to LA, you work in music or music adjacent, or you watch like Adult Swim on Cartoon Network, his work has been on there for like 15 years. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about the grind and really like talking about the future of work in this very specific way, a bunch of digital artists looked at the Beeple sales as like, yo, this is validation for our digital artwork being legit, like dollar for dollar valuable, but also our time being valuable and our art being respected. It is worth, you know, it is worth the money, but it's also worth the attention beyond just being uploaded somewhere and letting sit on a server. And I think that was such a huge shift for a lot of artists to understand that hopefully, fingers crossed, your art can pay your bills. And yeah.
I just want to comment on that, because I think actually the way I see it, and I think the art world shares this, is that's the there. And so now artists, and Beeple was around, and that was the first question that everybody asked after that the Beeple sale, like, who is this artist and where has this person been? But Beeple had been around. Mm-hmm. And I think that the point was that now the artists had a platform to show their art. You didn't need an agent. You could structure a transaction, right? Like, smart contracts are important. Transaction protocol is essential. So you're now giving voice, as everybody's been talking about in the morning sessions, we're focused on this. You're now giving voice to artists and creators that they didn't have before. You're taking the agent out. But I would also say, go forward a few years, to your point. It's not always about the NFT as an art object. It's about changing the transaction and changing the way you do the transaction so you can start peeling the layers off. You know, and I think a lot about, just because I've been in the art world for a long time, I think a lot about Artists' Resale Rights Act, if I'm getting that correct, which exists in California, which we completely squashed with the help of museums, by the way, which is amazing to me, in New York State, which is going to bubble to the surface as the new norm, in my view. Same holds true for philanthropy. So, you know, we just sold 3 beautiful paintings for the Toledo Museum of Art. Imagine if that transaction was governed by a smart contract, and every time those paintings would be resold from the person who bought them 2 weeks ago, every time they would be resold, what if the Toledo Museum participated in that sale? And so then when you start to think about those possibilities, like maybe every artist who makes a sculpture, a painting, an NFT, it doesn't matter what the object is. Now when you have a transaction protocol associated with that, the artist can participate. And I think that's where you start to open the door and be like, oh my gosh, what happens with the auction houses? You know, what's the meaning of the intermediaries? And then what's the potential both for philanthropy and artist participation?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we're talking about a reevaluation of the structures of power and wealth in the art world, I think that's a really interesting conversation. I don't think that's what we're talking about right now. Like, we didn't need blockchain to do artist resale royalty. We just needed to have the value to do that, right? We also didn't need blockchain to value ephemeral media art or practices like People's, right? And in fact, like when we look at why this was successful, and People himself, you know, he opted out, he sold out because, you know, artists are reduced to currency designers. That's how NFTs function, right? Like you are literally there as a use case to make everyone who holds crypto wealthier. And, you know, we talked about this revolutionary moment of, oh my God, artist resale royalties. Again, we didn't need blockchain to do that. That's been around since the 70s, an idea. And even back then it was 15%, right? And then platforms come around and it's 10%. So it's actually like a step backwards. But, you know, I think that there are a lot of opportunities now for arts organizations because, first of all, arts funding is in crisis before NFT shows up. Second of all, people do talk about these values as if they're now a possibility, right? And arts organizations have these great systems of governance, and they have them developed. And actually, they have been largely corrupted by funding, and that's sort of the contemporary situation of the institution. So if we're really interested in talking about restructuring wealth and power, we are in a position to put that squarely in the studios and really reverse that. But I don't think that's what we're really talking about. I think we're talking about rebuilding a lot of these structures and doing this sort of doublespeak, which is sort of endemic in the crypto space, of saying one thing and actually meaning another.
Spicy. But yeah, I mean, that is kind of like the elephant in the room, right? You know, this question of, okay, yes, you know, artist royalties and, you know, WAGMI and all of the, you know, the positivity, as Sarah meant, the toxic positivity. But ultimately, it's like, you know, this idea of, okay, we're shifting gatekeeping. But it's still gatekeeping in some weird way, right?
Absolutely. Every time an artist gets 10% royalties, someone who's already crypto rich gets 90% wealthier, right? So we're looking at extreme concentration of wealth and power still within this quote unquote new system. As Reihan said, it is the people who were in early at $1 or less who hold most of the ETH and actually run most of the market and move most of the market.
I mean, Sai, you're in it with OpenSea. I mean, how many millions of dollars transaction-wise happens a month? It's something ridiculous, right?
Yeah, you can go to dune.xyz, dune.xyz, and that'll give you a volume of all the activity happening in the Ethereum ecosystem. So there's a lot. Like, you know, I mean, because of you know, crypto prices going down, you know, the whole market's like slowed down. But last year, there was just a lot of money flowing. But to that point, you can also see, this is the thing about blockchain, you can see which wallets and like where the money is flowing. And to Kelani's point, I mean, this is a guess, but I'm pretty sure, you know, 20% of holders control 80% of the market, something like that. Like, so, and you know, we call them whales. So that is the core issue that I'm really, you know, equity is something that is like fundamentally important to me. And the way the money is moving through our markets now, like, because there is such a concentration of power. Like a really good example is when the American Constitution was made, actually none of us were probably thought about in the room. And like, that's how America was built out. It's the same example. It's like, you know, the concentration of power and wealth determines what the outcome will be, which is why, you know, maybe it's like, you know, hopeful optimism, but accessibility still is the #1 like important value that I hold to help more people kind of shift the narrative. But yeah, like that is the big disillusionment that I also have with the space, is it's not equitable.
But I have a rejoinder to that, because I think it's really interesting to watch the rebrand of crypto to Web3. Yeah. And, you know, on the one hand, it feels kind of like, you know, my inner MBA coming out, like, oh yeah, this is great. But part of it's also super interesting because it also is a rallying cry for me when I, again, talk to artists. While all the guardrails were in place for art royalties and stuff in the past, this is really the first time that tech has enabled a lot of artists, regardless of where you are in the world, to stand alongside platform developers, marketplace developers, smart contract coders, and be like, yo, this is what I need. You aren't showing my avatars the right way, fix that. Or hey, I need someone in the room who can help me write this type of code. And the market is still so nascent that you can establish a lot of these things to be artist-first norms in a way that you couldn't, for example, in the era of like Spotify if you're a musician, Facebook if you're a writer, etc.
I really believe that artists hold all the power in this moment. I think they don't know that and they don't understand that yet necessarily, but we see so few examples of people doing what you're talking about, which is pushing against these mechanics, which are optimized for gambling, right? That's what this is. It's math. It's a bunch of math nerds with their numbers go up, right? That's what this is. So if we want to push back and say, well, what about my rights as an artist? What about the sovereignty over my practice? What about the ways I want my work to be shown, treated, traded, all of these things, right? But so few people are doing that because it's not profitable. It doesn't feed the crypto economics beast.
I also think that becomes super interesting because you have a lot of artists who, I mean, my specialty vis-a-vis NFTs and crypto is specifically in music. And you have a lot of musicians who ask like, yo, how much, like if someone owns this, do they own my masters? And the answer is always, it's as little as you want to give them or as much as you want to give them. And I feel that this lack of definition is both a blessing and a curse for NFTs, where if as a fan or as a buyer, you buy something and the artist says, yo, this is no more valuable than like a band t-shirt, that's what it is. But if an artist says, hey, we're gonna put all my rights on chain, you're gonna get a cut of existing streaming revenue, like the artist is the one who has to spell that out. And the artist is the one who has to be like, yo, you can do as much or as little as you want here. And it's rare for a lot of folks to have that conversation. Yeah. And that's one thing that I'm personally very grateful to be able to do day in, day out with FWB and all of y'all in here. If you have questions, hit me up. Like, we can hash this out. Because if we don't have these convos today, the next version of music NFTs will just look like Spotify. And then people will be like, yo, I made 0.001 cents. And that's a good day? Like, no, forget that. That's stupid. Like, why in an age of, again, digital scarcity doesn't have to be anti-abundance, right? That just because you can only see the Mona Lisa physically in one spot doesn't mean that everyone can't benefit from it together in their own ways. And I feel that you have these conversations now, so hopefully people don't get wrecked later.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the Debbie Downer of what we're looking at, you know. I think that's why Jack Dorsey was so anti-Web3, right? He was saying, well, Web3 is essentially Web2, but owned by VCs and money people. So, you know, that is kind of the current reality that we're facing. But I don't want to end this on a bad note. I do want to end this on a really hopeful note. I mean, how do you see this space being able to prevent that we're not going back to what you said, an NFT, you know, Spotify?
We need to be prototyping and building new alternatives. And that's really where I've been spending my effort instead of gambling and trading and aping in. And I think we need spaces where we can talk about the relationship of art and industry. It's funny, I was talking to this Mall of DAO person where they were explaining to me like this sort of spectrum of DAOs, and they were talking about layer 0, which is the people layer, the human layer. And, you know, everything that's innovative that's happening is on layer one. So it's all about transactions and money distribution and voting. But like, what about the human orchestration and human organization? And this is something where Friends with Benefits like massively fails on the regs, right? Like it's a disaster. Every DAO is, right? And it runs on free labor, and it, you know, it's a mess. You know, there's no central vision, there's no coordination in any meaningful way. So I think we need spaces to experiment with that. And actually, arts organizations are the ones I think that are really well positioned to do that, because they have been building community, building publics, building identities, helping us understand our place in history and reflect on our current moment, and all of these interesting things about being human that has nothing to do with NFTs and scarcity. It has all of the other possibilities within this ecosystem of peer-to-peer economies, data sovereignty, identity, thinking about sharing resources like decentralized storage. There are so many more potentials that could be explored in this moment, and we have to start to build in those alternatives and build out those spaces. I'm going to do a quick shill. You can go to eatworks.xyz. This is a new salon series that's launching during NFT NYC. It's both virtual and in person, so if you're not in New York, no worries, come join us virtually. It is a space to be having these conversations about art and industry, and not just in this moment, but reflecting back on the last 60 plus years of history of art being in bed with technology and industry.
Oh, one more time.
eatworks.xyz.
Saya, what about you? What is kind of the future hold for Web3?
Yeah, I look at this in two parts. Like, there's my individual lens. Like, what can I do as an individual, right? My skill set is like, so I work in the human world, right? I work in organizational development and thinking about how, you know, people come together, how we get more equity in the workplace, you know, in our society. And so to that extent, I do what I can, like kind of making the space more accessible, sharing, you know, maybe like the scale at which I'm doing it is much smaller than, you know, 1 to like 1 million or 1 to 100,000. So there's that individual element. And from an organizational level at my job, how do I, like, you know, OpenSea being like an incredible forefront company for the NFT ecosystem, you know, that's the responsibility that I hold. Like, how do I help guide the organization and, you know, like try to carry the Web3 ethos? Like, what is the future that we want to build? And I think I really resonate what you said about like building. Like, there needs to be a lot more safe spaces for people to experiment and build and dissect like what we are building versus, you know, everyone building and running and then like trying to like monopolize and just build in a silo, because that's when you start. I think Facebook is a really good example of it just grew like so fast globally, and it just became a monopoly, and it was really hard to turn back all the experimentation and, you know, all the things that they built. And it still feels like in this happy, sometimes very toxic but chaotic mess that is Web3, there's also a lot of good energy for builders and for people, you know, like thinking about, like very tactically, what does DAO operations look like? You know, what does it mean to manage a Discord and, you know, have honest conversations and collaborate? Or even at the tooling level, like how do we build more tools that allow people to, you know, practice better, like safer wallet usage, you know, things like that. So there's just so many different aspects, and it's because there's so much happening, it's very easy to forget that the whole space is just really, like, the amount duration that it's been around is really short. Like, the internet hasn't even been around for more than, you know, like 50 years, like as a consumer product. And so when you think about it that way, I had this aha moment when I was thinking about, you know, like the US as a society and like the world as a society. Like, it's always evolving and there's always these tensions. And like when you're in the change management of it, it's very hard. It feels like, oh, there's so much to do. But when you pause and you say, oh, like, play your part where you can, but see the bigger picture and then continue having these conversations. Like, I'm really thankful for meeting everyone, because I'm like, whoa, I'm learning a lot of new perspectives, and it really gives me a broader worldview that had I not been here, and I probably wouldn't have leaned in on Twitter, you know, like, I think that it adds so much color, and I can take that to say, okay, like, how does this impact on how I show up? And for artists especially, I think continuing to experiment and understand what it means to you, like why you could use this. Like it's kind of going back to the age of it's okay to try new things, even if it might not be, like a Beeple piece, because the more people experiment, I think you make it your own, right? And you begin to define what it becomes. And that's the power in it. So I think that's where I feel really optimistic about it, despite, all the things that are happening.
Nina, what about you? Web3 for institutions.
I mean, I think, look, I think the future of bringing the control of what you do with your art, what you do with your works that are deaccessioned from your institution, what do you do as the seller, as the creator? To me, there's like so many incredible optimistic possibilities. And I think, there is a tension between where is money being made, the whales, the concentration of kind of wealth and interest among VCs who are trying to buoy their own investments. That absolutely exists. That's what we saw in the first really huge 3 NFT sales that took place in the span of about 3 months. So I don't want to say, oh gosh, this is a perfect universe, but there's a huge difference between telling a sort of, dictating how transactions should happen, whether royalties are paid back to X, Y, or Z, which would be state-run, versus, oh, if you make it, you get to say what happens to the proceeds. And I get it, like 90% is going back into the pocket of somebody else, but that, hopefully, with the education of you three, certainly not me, because I'm really not transacting in this world as much as you, but, it's inspiring listening to all of these panelists who have the potential to be educating and working with and developing new protocols with different, and I call them sellers, but so many of them are creators, I think, through the lens of museums, because I'm always shocked that museums can't participate in perpetuity in sales of works from their collections, because those proceeds are going back to fund nonprofit sort of projects. So that's where I see this, and I'm probably coloring it through a rose-colored glass, because when I'm listening to all of you, there's certainly a need for, okay, let's help people to understand how that concept could be more productive for themselves. And I think it just goes back to the originator, the person who made it, the person who's selling it, figuring out what is the most productive, what is the most positive, what is the best use of this transaction.
Reihan, you have the last word. No pressure.
Go make art. Go do cool shit.
I promise we are going to open this up to Q&A. So I know we had tons of hands. Where's our freestanding microphones? Ooh, gosh. I guess let's do back. Oh, I'm so sorry for those that are running mics. Over there on this side? Oh, you don't? No, there's a mic right there.
So the video art market has always been tiny. Mm-hmm. And do you think what's happening now with the digital NFT market, that it's going to end up embracing the video artists? Because I find that literally there are only a handful of collectors in the video world. And the overlap between the gamers and everybody else who's into digital art, there's a huge overlap. But how is that going to translate? There you go.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we have a lot of work to do to shine on that history and educate people about the context that this new market emerged from. And it really is that history that made this moment possible. Like if you look back to a practice like Nam June Paik and the great gallerist Howard Wise, they were all excited about the potentials for television and new audiences and reaching new audiences. And those ideas sowed the seeds for where we are today. So I absolutely believe, and I always have, which is why I invest the ways I do at Transfer, that there is so much power in that work and in that generation of practice. And it's also super clear that crypto has made the idea of time-based media art, I like to use that term as opposed to digital art, but time-based media art in general, which includes film, software, animated GIFs, everything, right? Even performance, online performance. People get it now, right? Like I would go to art fairs as Transfer Gallery and I would pay for a booth and I would install a website. And people would say, why would I want to own something that everyone can see for free on the internet? Well, that set of values has now massively arrived, and I think that that's going to boost this entire field in a way if we have people who are focused on the right things. The stewards, the people who work in the art world and understand this history and these structures, if we're not focused on just taking something to the moon as an NFT release and instead are focused on the right kinds of historical evaluation and support of these kinds of practices and issues like preservation, which actually blockchain does a lot and has a lot of potentials for preservation. The thing is, it's not going to make anyone buku bucks, right? This is hard custodial work that we all have to invest in and do. So I'm really hopeful that that happens. Thank you for the great question.
I'm curious, Nina, have you seen an uptick on video art sales in the auction world, or?
So I wish I could be more positive. Not really. And I also think this is such an important space. And I agree with you because the genesis of so much of this visually, or part of it visually, does come from digital art or time-based media art. I'll give a negative example and a positive example. We actually helped to make an NFT with the owner of the first project by Namjoon Pike, and we thought, oh my gosh, this is really speaking to the history of this media, and it fell completely flat. In fact, I'm not even sure if it sold. I think it did, but it fell below expectations. Not to say that the financial outcome, guys, speaks to success all the time. It does, for better or for worse, keep the machine going in terms of, if something sells for, how about this? We all paid attention when the high value sales took place. So there is an element of perceived success or lack thereof. On a positive note, we are working with a museum right now who is looking at works in their own collection and saying, how can we make an NFT and make this interesting? If we just make an NFT of a work in the collection, it's not dissimilar to a mug that I might sell in the gift shop. It's reproductive. And so they've actually invited a video artist to come and interpret the work and literally take it apart and create visual video narratives. And it's this beautiful blend of these will be sold as NFTs in additions, and blend of sort of speaking back to looking back at video art, presenting it on a different platform, again, using a smart contract to pay back royalties to the artist, but also creating a philanthropic stream for the museum. But we're sort of curious and interested to see how this does, because this is a complete experiment for Sotheby's, for this major encyclopedic museum, and for this artist. So I think that's a positive collaboration, and hoping it will be well received.
The best example in the museum world that I've come across is the MoMA did that release with Feral File and the work of Rafiq Anadol, which, whatever the NFT part, to me, not interesting. Like, I just think that there are so many other ways that museums can play in this moment. But what they did that was super interesting is that they then airdropped museum passes, MoMA passes, to these crypto folks. And anecdotally, I heard that some ridiculously shocking large percentage of them didn't know what the MoMA was, and found that, though, in their wallet and found their way into the museum. That's an amazing success story. That's engaging identity, community, trying to bring people into a world, across a world. So I love that example.
It's I feel like a really tangible way is like, don't share the same slice. Like, don't try to vie for one pizza, everyone for the slice in the pizza. Like, make the pie bigger. Like, I fumbled on my words a bit, but you know what I mean. Yeah.
Ooh, over there.
So if any of you have a pile of crypto of any flavor, would you buy NFTs? And is it a good investment, or is it just a chance for some artists to make money before the whole crypto world melts down?
Kind of too late, but go ahead.
Kind of too late, sorry.
I'm not going to answer this.
Raihan, you want to take that? I have a POV on this. Like, I fundamentally believe you're not buying NFTs, right? Like, buy what you like. So that's my philosophy. So if there is like a piece of art or something, that is, backed by an NFT. Like, it's not that I'm not a flipper. I'm not trying to trade. It's like something I genuinely like. It's kind of how, last week I got this box and I was like, what did I buy? And it was this thing I bought on Instagram, a yellow pot. And I'm like, I must have liked it and bought it a month ago. And it like holds no value whatsoever potentially in the world, but I like it in my house, So that's kind of my take on, like art NFTs. So I don't really look at it necessarily as buy NFTs for NFTs, because more than likely, like, this is my take. I think if you do that, you'll probably not have a great time. Yeah.
So I do actually. Oh, go ahead.
Just sort of following up on that, I agree with you. I don't think it's about the NFT. I think it's about all of the possibilities that come with it. Your point about MoMA and dropping passes, like, that's a huge, huge door opener. So for so many organizations, for so many artists for that matter, being able to make your organization accessible to people who wouldn't ordinarily walk through your door, that's game changing. Yeah. So is it about an NFT? No, it's about with the process. Again, I keep on talking about the transaction process, but what that process opens up and the possibilities that didn't exist before, membership benefits. Oh, all of a sudden you start thinking about that as a nonprofit. How can you associate membership benefits with the sale of your NFT so that more people will know who your organization is, what your mission is, what you do? And I think the same holds true with artists. So I, in a very cynical way, think that visual taste tends to ebb and flow. So what NFTs are, what they look like today, tomorrow, feels less relevant to me than the possibility of changing what the transaction is. Because once you change the transaction, you do really disrupt at least the art world.
I was just going to say I have a number of NFTs in my collection. It was just featured on Outland, the transfer collection. I've been collecting from my artists in the gallery for years before NFTs, but I don't really collect on ETH. I try to do as little harm as possible, so I have very few transactions on ETH. I aped into some felt zine NFTs, and of course I have friends with benefits NFTs that I've minted, but I collect on Tezos, and I followed my artists, right? So they all went on Tezos and started making their own markets there, and I wanted to support that kind of activity as a gallery. So I started to buy into Tezos, and I would send chunks of Tez to Wade Wallerstein, who's the curator, my co-curator at the gallery, and so we have this incredible collection now of a couple hundred NFTs on Tezos. So if you're curious about getting started, I would say stay away from the ETH ecosystem and find one of these clean platforms. Another one I can plug is Algorand. The great project there is Epic Gallery, which is an LA-based project. So if you're curious about collecting, follow the artists you love and stay away from the big ETH interests.
Wow, who are the ETH heads here? They're gonna walk out. No, I'm just kidding. Where's the mic? Mike, anyone? I'm going to have them do the...
You guys said something in the beginning about crypto disrupted finance and then art, then the art world, and then we can't wait for it to disrupt XYZ. Is it, right? Because there's this conversation about, is now Web3 going to eat the world, or is Web3 destined for like 5 use cases?
Is there a question there? Sorry.
How many use cases does crypto support?
So I feel like if we're talking about NFTs particularly, I mean, like Web3 also includes, like a broader crypto ecosystem. So I'll start with NFTs, but I think NFTs will be truly successful when we don't even say NFTs anymore. It's so ubiquitous. It's like we don't even call songs MP3s, or we don't call pictures JPEGs. There's just like a technology that defines what that thing is. So to that extent, yeah, like there may be a lot of different use cases, but that's my personal measure of success. Like in Web3, there's DeFi, decentralized finance. There's like all these different verticals. So I can't speak to that, the broader ecosystem that much, but that's my take on NFTs.
Agreed. Everyone agreed. All right, next question. There's hands in the back. Oh. Oh. Oh, over there. Okay. Hello.
Hi. So yeah, great panel discussion. I wanted to ask a question about the possibilities of public art with NFTs. Sort of not so much private ownership, but yeah, what are the possibilities of public art? You know, you see in the real world with graffiti or just for the public in general. So, any thoughts on that? Thanks.
NFTs just are public art, right? They're online for everyone to see. So I believe in this. I believe that the internet is a space for public art. So I think you're talking about like real world, physical public art, but I think that, you know, the internet is so ubiquitous to our experience, our lived experience, that any art that exists in that space is public art.
I'm going to play with that a little further as well, that we've even seen it specifically for a lot of DAOs that function as collector DAOs or curatorial DAOs, that the transaction may have happened on the internet or on Tezos or ETH, wherever, and the people who own those NFTs have then, you know, due to Creative Commons or another type of licensing structure, been able to be like, all right, I'm gonna put this up in the real world, I'm gonna spray paint a mural, or I'm gonna remix this as a shirt or what have you. And for me, that's actually kind of what becomes super interesting with a lot of digital art itself, digital native art as it currently exists, because it doesn't start and stop on your screen, on your phone. It's something that people are starting to really think about the underlying structures of how it was made, and then the kind of exoskeleton of where they can take it as kind of hybrid fan curators in their own way. Even, for example, in the street art world in particular, I've watched artists like Shepard Fairey, Obey Giant, Vils, JR, a bunch of folks who have made native pieces on Ethereum as NFTs or repurposed old working structures. Like in Shepard's case, I worked with him for years. He would take all his stencils, everything that he laser cut or did CNC, and when he did his own collection on mainnet ETH, he took all those files, and it was very easy for him to conceptualize what the algorithmically generated files would look like, because it's not really the algorithm, it's a reprocessing of his own mind. And he would take those same pieces, turn them into t-shirts, prints, and his own gallery show again. So there's a realm in which all of that becomes, you know, full street art for people to see, tag over, scratch over, deface as they wish.
Yeah, as you two were sharing that too, I was like, oh, yeah, it's redefining what is public art, right? Like, because if there is graffiti on a wall, only the people who are physically there can really see that public art. But when you start spreading that through different spaces, like, how does that redefine what public art really means? So, yeah, I'm like,
Questions in the back? I don't know where the mic is. Oh, over there? Okay.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So, Kelani, you made a really amazing point before about even with 10% royalties, someone wealthy still gets 90% richer. So I'm wondering, is there a royalty distribution path forward that can leverage that existing wealth in a positive way? Is there a way to use royalty streams to, you know, make the pie bigger, as was said?
Yeah, I think we should be looking at ways to redistribute wealth all around. And it is something that is the responsibility of those who hold the power to want to do that, right? And, you know, this is a huge opportunity for artists because we can set the terms. We can decide how we define value and what kinds of rights we want to have in this ecosystem. And we can make the tooling work for us. Not if we're chasing money, not if that's our goal, but if we say that we want to define our values and then find ways that the tooling fits to those values. Unfortunately, right now, the tooling follows the money, follows the power, right? So it's also just not inventing new possibilities because it's just being applied and reapplied, and there's a million new NFT platforms launching. I would do a show of hands, like who's launching an NFT platform right now, but we're not going to go there. So yeah, I mean, I think it's possible, right? Absolutely.
Wait, before I go back, I personally have a question. What do you guys think of Meta?
formerly known as Facebook?
Yeah, and Mark Zuckerberg taking over the Metaverse. I mean, I'm just curious what everyone's take on this. I kind of know what Kelani's take on it, but I'm just curious.
I think companies will build what they build to keep relevancy. But I think the fallacy is that no one can own the metaverse because no one can own the internet. So
Are you sure about that?
Well, it's like maybe it's a gray conversation, but it's not like if Meta created the metaverse, then unless we're all brainwashed and then our phones just came with the internet became Meta and all of a sudden we had to go to the bank in Meta and we had to unless all of our activities ended up in Meta, I find it difficult to see Meta as the metaverse where everyone is in. And that is the secret beauty of being decentralized, is that no one can really own every 7 billion people into one space. It's
8 billion.
Oh shit. Okay. 8 billion. So to that extent, I think Meta will build what they build, and there will be people who use it. Maybe in a lot of emerging economies where people use Meta a lot, we might see activity there. But TBD, depends on where people's sentiments go for the next couple of years, probably.
Any other controversial hot take? Meta? No, Raihan's like that.
I'll go there for a second.
Oh, okay.
Sure.
Oh.
I don't know
Let's
if
go.
my friend Jenny's in the audience, but I love you, honey. Metaverse was a problematic term upon arrival, right? It already was this sort of dystopic idea when it first showed up in literature. So the fact that a company wants to reference that, first of all, is confusing, just straight off the bat, right? But the other thing is that, this discussion of metaverse and, virtual land ownership and all of this stuff, first of all, is just us rebuilding colonial structures in an entirely open space. But second of all, it sort of relies on this false notion of digital dualism, which is not the case. We actually are. The metaverse is here. It has been here, ever since the military-industrial complex took over and technology became a part of popular culture, right? When we think about this brand and this approach to it, it really just it's layers of stupid is, I guess, how I would summarize it. I want to just reference the artist I mentioned earlier, Laturbo Avedon. Please follow this artist on Twitter. Laturbo believes in this idea of EXO, EXO, which is the non-corporate metaverse, in which artists have sovereignty over their own worlds and some sort of agency to control those. You don't need to buy land in a metaverse because you can just create your own world.
Next victim. Over there. Where? Mike, where? Up. There's some hands all the way in the back that's been very patient. In the middle? No, all the way in the back.
Hello, thank you so much for all of this. It's absolutely mind-blowing. I'm curious. I have GarageBand files from 2005 that won't play on my computer.
Yes.
How is that going to affect these pieces going forward? How is the technology supporting future viewing, given our constant evolution of JPEGs and MP3s and whatever other platform it might be? I know that that's been a question in the digital collection spaces at museums as well. How do we preserve these and then keep them available? Could someone speak to that, please?
I can certainly speak to the questions that museums are facing, but the technology, not being a technologist, is absolutely beyond me. I think what I've been surprised by is the reluctance for so many museums to know what lane to go down. This is a very new kind of visual practice, but it's not, because video art has been around for a while, and museums, some want to kind of stake their claim, and it's very intimidating. The MCA Denver is really focusing on this area. I think the Bass Museum, actually in Miami, is sort of trying to understand what does it mean to collect NFTs? How do we sustain them? How do, what does conservation look like? What if the technology changes? So I hear the questions a lot. I am the last person to have an answer to them. But, we see this, and what museums collect becomes sort of emblematic of the taste of the time, and is a little bit of a justifying what should be collected. So I think mainly a lot of museums are super hesitant to take a step because they just don't know.
I think the way I would look at it is this, that one underlying question that a lot of folks have vis-a-vis NFTs and art is, I always ask that, does this need to have money involved? That if we took the financialized aspect away from blockchain and we just looked at your GarageBand files as they were, there's a whole burgeoning, net art, net music, net label scene that has been around for decades, and I'm sure a lot of you will listen to, nightcore, hyperpop, all this kind of stuff, bedroom pop, you name it. And there is a world in which people are already stewards of these files and these technologies, making sure your VSTs, your plugins, everything work as is. This has been a thing since forum culture decades back. And is there a realm in which blockchain and the financialization incentivizes this and speeds it up? Yes. But will that happen without kind of someone, again, an artist or a creator saying, this is important to me, therefore I need it? No. So if those GarageBand files are important to you, you might need to do some hard drive repair, which is not fun. You might need to find your local nerd to help you out here. But unless this is actually one problem, actually, Kelani alluded to this with DAOs in general and crypto in general, is that so much of it right now is really optimized for people raising their hand and being like, yo, help me, And without that, the folks who are having the capabilities to do this won't know to help you. Otherwise, you have to go in and build it yourself.
Yeah, when it comes to music, and a really interesting domain will be law and just intellectual property, right? If you're creating a piece and you're sampling music, these studios have teams of legal teams that vet can we use this music from this sample and all of that, and yeah, you have bootleg versions on SoundCloud and all of that, but I think this is where, if there is a future in which music and NFTs, we're not there yet, but we can start classifying samples or songs or whatever with this is owned by this person and produced, etc. It shifts how we address it, and maybe even people who don't have access to large legal teams, there's potential to protect your work. So that's where I'm curious to see how the legal field will evolve.
There's actually some precedence there with kind of late 90s, early 2000s structure of Creative Commons, where artists and content creators of all stripes could say, yo, this is for free for everyone to use. It doesn't matter what you do with it. This is free as long as you're using it non-commercially, and then this is free, but you have to put in attribution. And one huge use case for blockchain that is non-financialized is the fact that attribution happens on chain. If someone uses a sample that I've put on chain, that's always going to be a part of the file moving forward.
You're trying to shill your thesis?
Oh no, I'm not trying to shill my honors thesis from undergrad.
There's so many shilling here. Oh my God, are you gonna NFT your online thesis or your thesis?
I wanted to NFT my MBA.
Oh.
And fractionalize and give it, be like, yo, if you own a piece of this MBA, you are entitled to X amount of my time.
I'm sure your mom would love that, by the way.
But Raihan, think about it in a very traditional way, and I know we started here. Think of what happens with provenance. With provenance, which does dictate so much of is something right? Has it been in a place that it shouldn't have been? Is it who it should be by, who we think it's by? I mean, all of these issues start getting very sort of flattened once you associated that information on an NFT.
100%. I mean, it's kind of a real big, almost Herculean situation where there are some folks who are hardcore anti-copyright maximalists, and they're like, we want to use this to burn the whole system down. And it's really hard to answer that question, right? That how granular, for example, does a sample or a reference become? Because, coming from academia, near UCLA, we know what a works cited, we know what bibliography is, and like, we know what that atomic unit of information is. But for rich text and rich media like music, where you might be stacking decades worth of samples, layers of provenance across the world, I think there's still a lot to be done there, and it's such a blue sky question I don't think any of us can answer, even collectively right now.
But there are people working on and experimenting on it.
Hive mind. All right, next. Microphone check. Over there.
Hello. I've been in the blockchain space since 2017 and the NFT space since February of 2021. And I've been having conversations with my mom, as I'm sure some of us have here in this room. And
shout out moms.
And shout out mom. She's here right there.
Oh, hello, Mom.
Hi, Mom.
So I want to thank you for hosting this panel. This is going to totally evolve our conversations moving forward. She's been working at the LA Art Museum, and just want to thank her for giving me birth and encouraging me to follow my inner artist and being so supportive. I know you shouted out to mom earlier, so. But the question I have is,
NFTs bringing families together.
That's right. Yes. That's right. The question I have is, with NFT NYC coming up, and you mentioned this earlier, we were involved in curations for certain events in the past, and somebody brought a 12-piece orchestra and a live opera. It was like the first live opera NFT, and I thought it was so cool. And so I'm wondering, what is something you want to see at some of these NFT gatherings moving forward, whether that's live entertainment, whether that's how information's shared, whether that's icebreakers for people to connect. Yeah. Curious what's missing and what would you want to see moving forward? Thanks.
Yeah, all of that. And I love that you bring up that example of live performance. Like, there is such a richness in media-based practice in all genres, music, it's across the board. And really all that gets shine is generative art in this moment, which also has been around for a very, very long time. So I'm really eager to create spaces and structures which can leverage crypto capital to support all these varied forms of time-based media art, performance, and all kinds of work and practice, research-based practice, film distribution. There's so many potentials. And I think what you also said about human relationships and finding ways to connect people. It's so funny, right? Because in this moment with Web3, we've all been reduced to wallets. We're no longer humans, we're wallets. We are transactions. We are a sum total of our transactions. So I'm really, really interested in experiments that think about that quote unquote layer zero, or our human interactions, our human relationships, what kinds of cultural value come together in interactions and exchanges that are human. So I'm excited to see more experiments in that space, and it's what we'll be prototyping in this first salon that I mentioned earlier.
I want to see on-chain fight clubs.
Yes.
Have you heard of Mecha Fight Club?
No.
It's a cyber cockfighting on-chain fight club that is powered by AI. So these are all NPC roosters, and you essentially they would fight.
Now we're talking. It sounds like Zedrun, the horse racing NFT thing, but far worse.
But really cool graphics.
Okay.
Nice. Keep it going.
I think that a positive answer to that question is there's really just such a really cool thing for artists, fans, people experiencing stuff in real life to use their digital identities as a facet of who they are in person. And that's going to show up in a variety of ways. So, part of my Fight Club thing is in jest, but part of it's also just Kelani mentioned wallets, but I also believe in this kind of multiplicity of identities that we haven't had in a really long time. You log onto Facebook, you're just your real name. You log onto IG, you're just your, whatever your account is. But, from 4chan talks about the fact that, you step into different digital realms, and the way you talk to your friends, the way you talk to your music folks can be way different than the way, you talk to moms, the way you talk to your classmates, etc. And how we manifest that on chain through a variety of different technologies it's going to show up both in attention of real world events like this and how this ends up digitally. to the point where, honestly, I haven't even been using the word wallets lately. I've been using chain interfaces a lot, which sounds more technical, but it is, less financialized.
So there should be a mom DAO. Yeah,
You
mom
should say
DAO.
it.
Powerful.
DAO it, moms. How are we with time? I guess we got a couple more questions in the audience.
I have.
Just a reminder to keep masks on when asking questions. Thank you.
Yes.
I actually kind of have a follow-up question to that, and it's based off something you said, Kelani, about this kind of double speak that happens in the crypto Web3 world, where there's the money and then kind of virtue signaling around that, and they hold these two things. And I think there's actually a kind of similar doublespeak happening within art institutions around NFTs and around the kind of crypto kind of bubble burst, whatever you want to call it. And I imagine there is a lot of institutional leaders of art spaces in the audience right now. And I'm curious if anyone on the panel could say, like, tangible, real programming or kind of like initiatives that art institutions could take on that's beyond a kind of platform or just like a space to show their NFTs. Because I feel like one of the things that all four of you talked about is like the crypto world really kind of thrives when people are like working and making, and it is this like in process kind of prototyping world. And I feel like the ways that it's talked about in the art world is very much like, let's hang it on the wall. And I feel like there's like a disconnect there. If you could speak around like, how do we get beyond that, maybe?
I mean, I think, and this is going to be very simplistic, but I think one of the directions is to, instead of focusing around the object that can be sold, focus around what does the buyer or user get that brings them back to the creator, that brings them back to the organization. And I know I'm always thinking through the lens of to Kelani's example, the MoMA drop that then gave you a membership card that brought you back to the institution. But there's so much discussion right now that I get involved in about sort of how do we create more awareness around these organizations by inviting people in ways that are not necessarily physical, in ways that can be digital, they can be content, they can be programming, but inviting people in who just don't know anything about the institution or aren't in the physical place. Or we talked about public art. If you're not standing in front of the street art, then you're not experiencing it. Well, one of the ways to do this that isn't necessarily transaction-based is to create that kind of, membership benefits in a totally simplified way, but which really give platforms to these organizations that people should know about. And I think that's part of the flattening, the democratization, and that to me is quite meaningful.
Yeah, I think we're in the MySpace days here. Like NFTs are the MySpace of Web3, basically. And because the art world is, so sort of behind the curve when it comes to specifically internet and, computational technologies, everyone thinks that's the whole story. And everyone's kind of scrambling to think about scarcity and ERC 721 and NFT type contracts. But I think what institutions really need to do is look at the ways that they serve their audiences, the way that they create meaning, looking at and breaking down the types of value which they maintain, the ways they're the keepers of culture and how that cultural value articulates over time and through time. And when you take a close look at those things, you can then start to think more broadly, other than scarcity and digital ownership, what are the other kinds of affordances of Web3, right? What are the other ways that it's functioning? So some of the things that are super, super promising are things, again, I feel like I'm a broken record, but P2P economy. So what does it mean to connect people directly with each other within your ecosystems? Where are you connecting humans? In what ways? You're connecting humans with history, with other communities, with their local audiences. Look at those connections, and then we can think about ways to apply these toolings to those types of value. Or things like distribution or shared assets and maintenance. Like, what does it mean to, instead of hold centrally a collection, a sort of colonizing perspective, an extractive perspective, like what would it mean to address that and support art and culture in a different way? And how can this technology open up possibilities for that? So I think it just takes a few institutions to really think about leading the way and wanting to do this kind of design thinking work within their own structures, and finding the means to do that with individuals who are versed in the technology but open to building tooling that isn't just serving the status quo.
How are you guys feeling right now? Is your brain like mushed? Do we need a Red Bull? Like, Red Bull, people come. I know, Nina, you have to catch a flight. But thank you so much. Let's give it up for Nina.
Such a pleasure.
She has to fly to the Metaverse. No, not really, but. So we're going to take a couple more questions before our keynote, the incomparable polymath that is Reggie Watts. And all of you guys are held captive until then. But I know there are a couple more questions in the audience. Someone all the way in the back that was so patient. Yes, you. Yes, right in the middle, if there's a microphone for you.
Suitable to ask Ms. Del Rio, but I was actually wondering if you could speak to the philanthropic potential for NFTs, and also a little bit about how you've seen the evolution of AI technology merging with NFT interest.
I can actually take both questions, which is kind of cool. The philanthropic side has been really interesting. There are a variety of DAOs that are specializing in ecological causes, regenerative farming, foresting, et cetera. And doing so with the full understanding that a lot of the blockchain technologies that currently exist is a net negative for the environment. So they're saying, can we get ahead of that? And then on the dev side, a lot of folks are looking into it in such a way that is less harmful for the environment, whether it's the move from proof of stake to proof of work, et cetera. And then on the merging of AI and NFTs, one example that has been totally wrecking my brain in a good way have been from my friends Matt Dryhurst and Holly Herndon, two just killer artists and musicians based out of Berlin right now. And what they did is they took Holly's voice on record and they made a digital twin of her voice. And you could feed in any sound through this VST plugin, and it will basically ask, what would Holly sing given this sonic input? And it's to the point where they have a full set of mics, and you could do Holly Plus karaoke. That's her model's called Holly Plus. And you could sing into it, and it will be her voice. I could sing into it as this, and it would be transmuted to her voice. And they could create a variety of different vocal engines to do that. And the way she funded actually her DAO, her organization, is by selling the vocal model, and I think it went for 30 ETH, and it was bid on by I think 50 or 60 different folks in a pool. And that's just the start. There are platforms like Async Art, et cetera, that are saying that as work is minted, it will interface with the chain. So what you as an artist have created, whether visually or sonically, will at the time of minting be a co-creation with the person who minted and paid for the art. So, I think it's really early days, and that's actually personally what I'm super interested in right now. I'm happy to chat further.
Yeah, the deeper you go down the rabbit hole, NFTs, as we know now, are mainly from a technical aspect. ERC 721s are most common, but there's fractional NFTs, right? If you could take one NFT and then make it into many NFTs, every time an NFT is traded, it shifts the NFT. There's even one called, there's a project called Kuzu, which is when you send this NFT to somebody else, it's like a virus. That person can't erase it. So if they transfer it out, the copy stays in their wallet, but it gets sent out. So this person basically tracked how the NFTs were being traded, and it shows virality. So there's a lot of like interesting different types of experimentation even around the technology. So that's where it'll be like, yeah, it'll be cool to see what comes out.
Okay, we're gonna get 2 more questions. Oh, middle hand.
Thank you. I'm also team bring your parents to the hammer for art show.
Let's go.
So
Mom Dow,
these are
Mom
my
Dow.
parents.
Oh, what's up?
Great minds think alike. I will preface this because I'm also hypercritical. I'm also a digital artist. I have been super lucky that I found NFTs and have changed my life forever. I will probably do NFTs for the rest of my life. I worked for Rafiq and was doing public art and shifted towards this as like a totally different thing. So the fine art market was something not even on my horizon as a career. And so now I'm navigating this and like talking to collectors for the first time, like doing gallery stuff. And it's really gnarly. And I'm curating now and like helping friends do things. And a lot of my friends are like, I want nothing to do with NFTs. I want nothing to do with the fine art market. And then so I feel like the fine art market has gone through this sort of, I mean, thank God Nina's not here, but it's like a very corrupt place.
Just go for it. She's no longer here, guys.
Yeah, so it's very, I'm getting this like crazy vantage point from, you know, freelancing, and now I'm like in it. And I see a lot of the same tendencies in NFTs, even like heightened, where, you know, NFTs were like 70% gambling. And so I'm curious where you see NFTs in the future, and if it's more of a fine art market that needs to change, and maybe the bubble needs to burst, and how NFTs are allowing for a new accessibility, and it's almost more of a cultural shift than a technology shift. So maybe for Kalina, how do you see this coming in the next 10 years, and like what recommendations would you say for the fine art market?
I think it's going to get really dark. And I'm not going to go with my full vision of the future right now because I know we want to end on a somewhat positive note. So what I will say, I'll go back to my we can change things if we want to kind of thing. So
yes, we can.
I think what happened with NFTs is like, you know, for the first time, this adjacent market showed up. And the transactional value, right, the revenue, the wealth represented there rivaled the wealth in the contemporary art market. So what that art market represents now has to be reflexive to this other market. So now the market has become just one market, right? And I think what that opens up is the possibility for another market, maybe one that we set the terms around, that work better for artists, that are more about redistribution of wealth and thinking about longevity of artistic practice and conservation and upholding the canon that, you know, all of these great artists came up in. And I think that's for us to decide that we want to do it. But what's shown to be true is that it can happen. A new market has showed up. And so I think we can do that again and only better, hopefully, this time. Like we can iterate on that if we choose to. And what I would really love to see, and I think we do see, right, back to the question of philanthropy, the artists, some of the artists who have really made it in this moment are the new philanthropists, like the ones that went to the moon now. They're collecting other artists' work, they're funding things. We saw the platform Art Blocks put in this sort of stipulation that artists had to donate a percentage of their sales to charity. We need more people in positions of power, or the ones who hold wealth, to make decisions like that. And that can set us up to create a whole new market, one that iterates and doesn't make the same mistakes again. Because now we know it's possible. We made a new art market that really, just like you said, has a lot of the same failings as the old art market, but it's another one, has some different values, or it claims to, right? So I think we can do that again. That's the optimistic view. And if we don't, that's where we get into the pessimistic view, where these kinds of, we're just rebuilding these same systemic failures. We're going to do that in every industry, in every way, unless we sort of, and art has always been in a position really to make change like this, to lead and propose a cultural alternative, right? So I think that's a possibility.
think one way I look at this is also we want a world with more Etsy's and less Walmarts in a way. That is it worse to have balkanization of the market where you have a bunch of small markets? Not really, if that means, there's street food vendors and people using cry cuts and 3D printers at home and doing cool experiments and feeling free to create more. That's where I see kind of the future of a lot of NFT markets going. I see the erosion of kind of the larger power players because not everyone needs or wants to do that. If we just stick with the very simple hypothesis that digital art and art that's made digitally native is valuable, and this is the start of the revaluation and the popularization of that, we can take that further and we can make it something that is so special for folks who are unfortunately not artistically inclined, or at least they've had that sucked out of them, to find that spark again and to chase it down.
Yeah, and it's the idea of like microeconomies. The technology allows that to happen, and it's like when we say, how do we put money back into communities? For example, how do we invest in Black-owned businesses, right? Like, how do we put money into economies that historically and systemically have been like stolen from and taken away? Like, that's obviously like what we see in today's society. But as a parallel, like, the technology is there to be able to create these new economies that, if we go down the optimistic route, then you can start actually generating wealth into the hands of people who can like shift the economy toward, like, who can neutralize the economy a little bit more. Like, that doesn't happen overnight. And is there a way to do it? No, I think that's part of human society's evolution, is you can't predict the outcomes. It's how we all choose to kind of like play the role. But like, that didn't exist before, the ability to make these microeconomies. So that in itself, that's my like optimistic take of it's there if we choose to invest in it.
That's beautifully put, and I think that's the perfect way to end this. Thank you so much to our panelists, Saya, Kelani, Reihan, and
Thanks
Nina.
for hanging out.